First off, I'm a police officer in a very small town. I'm a little over 6'2". I work out. So, needless to say, when people see me, they tend to remember me. I guess I just have one of those faces. Anyhow, one night, my partner and I were working later than usual at the station, just hanging out and talking, waiting for our next call, and we got a dispatch to an unknown problem. Well, we go out there and pull up, and there's this man, who refers to himself as Dave. He's standing there in the middle of the road, staring at us blankly. Now, Dave is a pretty large guy, at least 6'4" and I'd guess 200 pounds. He was standing there like a statue and appeared traumatized. My partner and I get out and approach him. He still doesn't say anything or move. We ask him what's going on and he just starts tearing up. He tells us that he was driving home from work when he saw this thing walking out in the middle of the road. We asked him to explain a little more, and we're not sure what he was talking about. According to Dave, this thing that he's talking about was massive, at least 7 to 8 feet tall with dark black skin. It was wearing some kind of robe. He said he slowed down his car and got a better look at this thing, but when he did that, it got very violent and began running toward him, screaming at his car. Apparently, he floored it before getting very scared. But before he could get away, this thing had jumped on top of his car. Even though this thing couldn't really get Dave, he was still having a panic attack because it was at the top of his car, trying to break into his window. We asked him if he wanted us to call an ambulance, but he said no. He just kept telling us that we had to do something. However, there wasn't much we could do. There was no trace of the perpetrator anywhere, and we could see that he had drove a little ways and parked and was standing there mindlessly on the side of the road. There was also something really off about him. I didn't know what it was at the time. And finally, we ended up taking him back to the station to write up a report. While I was typing up my report, my partner was telling me that when she got close to near his car, she could smell something really, really bad, like rotting meat. But she said it wasn't coming from inside his car, just around it, like maybe he had hit a dead skunk or something. When we spoke to Dave, he seemed like he checked out. He was coherent. He was here. He wasn't some sort of druggy nut job you would pick up on the street. He was pretty much a very normal man. And he seemed very genuine about his account and experience with the unknown. While we didn't find anything that day, I'm not sure myself what to make of his experience. The man was clearly frightened. Something bothered him, but what it was, my partner and I will never know. But it's definitely creepy when you think about it. I recently moved back to my hometown in Hood River, Oregon. My grandmother just passed away a few months back, and as her only grandchild, she decided to leave her house to me. For some reason, none of my aunts or uncles were very happy about it, but my parents supported me, and that's all I needed. I mean, what else could I ask for? A free private property all to myself. Sign me up. I guess I should have known it sounded too good to not come with a catch. In the last years of her life, my grandmother started becoming a bit paranoid. She'd say she felt observed. She'd walk all around the house, making sure every blind would stay down and constantly taking peeks at them to her backyard. My grandmother's backyard leads straight to a forest, only a wooden fence separating her from the wilderness. She'd keep an eye on it every few hours, as she was expecting someone or something to come from the woods, straight to her property. When we asked her who she was looking for, she'd always say, "The beast with red eyes." We decided the smartest thing to do would be to move her to a nursing home, so she'd feel safer. She finally decided to stop pulling all the blinds down, and didn't really have a forest stretching backyard to stare at anymore. Mission accomplished. She never stopped mentioning the beast, though. She'd always warn us from it when we ended our visits. Back to the present. I've just managed to move the last of my things into her house. Now, it was time to work on making it look less like an old person's place and more like a nice cozy house I would actually enjoy. First thing I did, raise up all the blinds to give the place some direly needed airflow and light. As soon as I did, my attention was taken. Some movement seemed to shake the trees around, not far from the wooden fence surrounding the backyard. I stared at the spot for a moment, but the tree stood still. I attributed it to some animal moving about in the woods. Well, the next day, I'd been working on the place all day long. I was putting a lot of effort into it, and it was really beginning to look nice. I was now beginning to get attached to my grandmother's cozy house. So I was sitting there in the kitchen, drinking some tea after having a nice dinner, when a strange gleam caught the corner of my eye. I turned around to look into the forest, but saw it was as dark as always. I shook my head. I had just heard my grandma's stories playing on repeat in my head, and that's what was making me see things. I decided it was just time to go to bed. However, right before climbing upstairs, I ensured that every blind was closed. Next day, it was renovation day part 2. Got the materials I needed and went to give a fresh paint of coat to the furniture left on the back porch, facing the patio. I was pretty busy on my task, but I was subconsciously glancing the woods once in a while. As soon as I noticed, I shook my head. I can't let my grandma's old age paranoia ruin the best chance I've ever had at getting a proper house to myself. I'd swear, though, I'd heard faint rustling and movements from the forest quite often. Late at night, I was just chilling on my couch, browsing some Netflix without any real idea of what to watch, when a red, intense light shone straight from the forest. I stopped what I was doing and immediately put my face against the window. I managed to see them just for a second. 2 tiny, gleaming red lights shining from the forest outside, not that far from the house. Those were not lights, though. They were eyes. I immediately closed the blind and zoomed straight up to my room to roll around restlessly in bed, trying to keep out of my mind the impending feeling something would come right through the door at any given moment. The next day, I decided to assess the situation. The good thing was, I finally had fulfilled one of my adulting goals, having a place all to myself, and I was really starting to fall in love with it. Not only that, but it was also very nice and thoughtful. Besides, I knew I would have a really hard time selling it for its market value to get enough for another buyer, and whatever I could manage to get would not be nearly as big. On the other hand, it seemed like my grandma wasn't so paranoid. There was something, and it was getting uncomfortably close to my backyard. I decided to invest more time and money and effort on it before anything else. I decided to call animal control, make them check out the spot. The man came to the house, did a search on the other side of the fence, told me they didn't find anything. I was not satisfied, so I asked them to come back at night and do another quick round. They came, did yet another sweep. Again, nothing. I felt a bit more relieved, but maybe this time I was the paranoid one. Next day came by, and I was sitting on my kitchen, looking at my phone, sipping some coffee and considering if I should go to bed. The blinds that led to the backyard were closed. I stared at them. I slowly approached one, placing my hand on the handle. Should I raise it? My curiosity was beginning to take a hold of me. A part of me wanted to leave it down and never think what could be outside. Another part of me just had to know. I began to raise it slowly. It was halfway there, and I could see the fence but not the forest. My hand stopped moving. It seemed like nothing was outside. I really wanted to leave it there. I could not stop myself. For one strong pull, I lifted it all the way. Only the darkness greeted me. I let out a gasp, relieved, and suddenly, 2 gleaming red lights shone from the darkness. I froze in my tracks. They began getting closer. The thing was approaching, and as it did, I could see it now more clearly. It had a weird humanoid shape, but was covered head to toe in what seemed like fur. The only distinguishable trait was its glowing red eyes. I stopped a few meters away from the fence, just staring hauntingly at me. I closed the blinds immediately, grabbing a jacket and drove to a nearby friend's place. I don't know what to do. What if they're friendly? What if they're not? Has anybody heard of these before? I don't know who to ask without sounding crazy, but any help is greatly appreciated. I'm running this anonymously to keep my identity secure. I'm still active in my branch of operation. The stories I'm going to be sharing are from 2002 to 2005. During this period, we had just acquired some more top-secret technology from the jungles in South America. Today, alien technology is older news to us, but that was not the case back then. This newfound tech changed our technology, and it came with unavoidable force of darkness. I'm talking about shape-shifting interdimensional beings that could look like anybody you've ever seen. They're powerful. If your life ever flashes before your eyes in slow motion upon meeting one, don't be surprised. I'm now sharing my strange run-ins with this new threat. It all started when I was sent out for a reconnaissance on some abandoned military barracks, which were rumored to be occupied by a platoon of insurgents. According to my commanding officer, a drone had intercepted a radio transmission with the coordinates to the location earlier that day. Proceed in stealth, he said. We do not know if they're hostile or not. I hadn't been at the barracks for more than 10 minutes when I heard them. Footsteps from several directions, closing in on me. It was too late by then. They were all over. In what felt like a fraction of a second, I was surrounded by 4 vaguely human-shaped shadows, each about 7 feet tall, glowing eyes and fearsome teeth. During this momentary lapse of concentration, one of these beings quickly moved in behind me and put his cold, clammy hands over my face. All I felt then was a rush of energy entering into my consciousness. But what happened next is way too bizarre to describe in just a few words. I was experimented on, pulling the life out of me, quite literally. Every cell in my being was drained, while another was inserted into me to take my place until there was nothing left. It was as if I was being possessed. Everything they did seems so surreal now. It's hard to believe this is true. It felt too accurate at the time. Well, what happened next can be attributed to my training as a military operative. My will to survive kicked in, and I fought for my consciousness against the force within. I barely survived, but not without some permanent injuries. I was left with a few strange markings on my body. These never healed, and since then, I'm still unsure of where these other beings are. I can tell you this, though. The look in their eyes still haunts me to this day. My other 2 encounters with these same beings were just as terrifying, but I'll save those for another time. I'm actually a grad student, working on my PhD. I grew up near the Ozark Mountains, and I'm pretty familiar with its canyons and hollers. I've always been pretty outdoorsy, but after college, I decided to try and make it more my career. I've seen some strange things out here. Bears, panthers, wild cats, deer that won't die, no matter how many times you shoot them, it seems. Even my family's had some strange encounters with the latter once. While hunting elk, we got separated from one another on account, and these white deer dashing through our sights. Later that evening at the house, they told us about a member of their party seeing similar deer running through camp during the daytime. A few years later, hearing my dogs in the morning, I went out to find him barking up at an old white doe with a yearling fawn. These deer were more skittish and less afraid of humans than is normal. We've never had that problem before or since, even when we come across them while hunting. In any case, there have also been bear sightings around here for decades. They don't attack or anything. They just get up on their hind legs and try to figure out who you are and what you want from them. In these parts, it's best not to approach a black bear unless you mean to kill it. Anyway, that's all to say I'm familiar with the outdoors and know what I'm seeing. I was out turkey hunting by myself several weeks ago. It was getting later in the day. I had been walking around for hours with no luck, looking for any big toms, I was making my way back to my truck when I saw movement in a tree about 60 yards away. Thinking it was a deer maybe, I crept closer, and I could see that it was far too large, too big, and ultimately, too hairy. It looked like a man, but its head was too large for any human, and its arms were disproportionately long. It must have seen me or noticed me, because it jumped down from the tree and took off running at lightning speed. While I can't say for sure what I saw, it was definitely not a bear. I've never seen anything like that before, and I've been out here a lot. I'm pretty sure I'll never see anything like that again, but I wanted to share my story with you just in case anybody else has heard any similar experiences. My family has been hunting around here for a long time. My grandfather used to tell me stories of seeing similar creatures in these hills. I don't know what they are. I'm convinced they are real, especially now more than ever. He told me sometimes he'd be out hunting and hear strange screams in the distance. He knew whatever was making those screams was not of this world. I don't know what it is that's been spotted out here in the Ozarks, but I'm convinced that it's something strange and otherworldly. Whatever it is, I hope that it stays away from people and does not cause any harm. If it acts violent, I won't fret about shooting one in the face. I am a professional, licensed investigator in the United States. I am not a writer and never have written about this event until now. Second, I was a United States Marine Corps Infantry Platoon Commander in 1983 to 1986. I've had my share of life experiences that many people could never imagine they would ever face in their lives. I've seen things that most would make people's hair stand on end, some of which I cannot talk about because it is classified. In 1997, my wife and I were picking berries in a remote area of Washington State on Mount Adams. It was a warm day, and there were many out picking berries. We were spread out over a vast area of Mount Adams. It was also mid-August, and huckleberry picking season was ripe for the taking. As my wife and I were working our way around some very thick brush, getting to the next huckleberry bush, we came to a game trail that ran in an east to west direction. We decided to cut across the game trail. It was then that I caught out of the corner of my eye what appeared to be a very tall gray or tan human-like figure bending over at the waist. The figure was 50 to 75 yards away from us and appeared to be about 8 feet tall. I can tell you that I have spent enough time around soldiers who are either staff NCOs or above, Special Force operators, Navy SEALs, etc., to know what a man's movements look like when he is walking through the woods. What I saw was not a human being. A few seconds after seeing this, my wife spotted the same thing on the other side of us, and she became hysterical because of fear. She wanted to leave immediately. I looked at her and told her we should remain calm, and that we're going to act casual picking the berries. I knew that it was a long way from any roadway, and if this thing wanted to do something to us, it would have done so already. In retrospect, we probably could have easily fled. In a couple of minutes or so, we saw the movement of this thing disappearing in the brush. My wife was still hysterical and wanted to leave right then and there, but I convinced her to stay and that we would leave as soon as we could. We left within 5 minutes of seeing the creature and told no one about it until now. I've never had a reason to tell my story. I will say this though, that thing, whatever it was, struck a chord with me. I've never felt such a feeling of dread in my life. Something large. This is very aggressive in nature and could do a lot of damage to you if it wanted to. There's no telling what this thing was. I'm aware that the whole mountain is a hotbed for strange and paranormal activity. But I know what I saw, and it was not a Sasquatch or any other known animal for that matter. It was a tall, gray, human-like figure, and I've yet to figure out what it is. I was born and raised in the Detroit area, and now live full-time in Florida. I'm a lifelong fisherman and hunter. I've been all over the United States and spent a lot of time in Canada and Alaska. I've hunted and fished all over. I'm very, very familiar with wildlife of all sorts. But back in 1985, when I was 19, I was up on my way to the family cabin in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with a friend. It's actually near Sister Lakes, so named because it is actually two lakes connected by a stream. The area around the lake is mostly undeveloped forest, or swampy areas that are essentially part of Hiawatha National Forest. I have always been interested in wildlife, especially bear hunting, so this was a right place, right time situation for me. We were driving up M28, at night of course, because it's way out in the middle of nowhere, and about halfway between Munising and Newberry, we started seeing odd yellowish eyes glowing in the woods along the roadside. We both thought that they were deer eyes at first, until we got closer to them and saw that they were way too high off the ground. They looked about to be 7-8 feet up at first, but as I remember it now, they may have been more like 15 or so feet. My first impression was that somebody had put some stupid big, ugly yellow Halloween lights in the woods. We drove on for a while and started seeing them more and more frequently, to the point where it was really spooky. We turned around and went back the way we'd come, and they were still there, following us. My friend was getting pretty freaked, but I was fascinated. I started saying some stuff about how they were probably bears, which was a mistake. My friend wanted nothing to do with it and had me turn around again. I'm not sure what happened after that. I think we stopped somewhere. I think at an intersection on M28, maybe halfway between Stevenson and Munising, where there was a gas station. I don't remember precisely what happened next, except that we were both so freaked out. He insisted on continuing on to the cabin alone, and I agreed. He wanted nothing to do with whatever we were seeing, and I couldn't blame him. I was 19 years old at this time and very open-minded. I knew people who claimed to have seen Bigfoot, but I never really believed them. Looking back, the experience seems so weird that we would have had that on the road, and that would be my first real encounter with anything paranormal or abnormal. I don't know if this is relevant at all, but this was also in the middle of a 2 to 3 year period where there was a lot of really strange stuff going on in the Detroit area. Paranormal and cryptid sightings, people getting killed. It just seemed like a lot of the world was going crazy. I'm unsure if what we saw were multiple beings that were following us, or just one. Either way, easily one of the most terrifying things I've ever lived through. I moved to Baton Rouge in Louisiana 2 years back with my dog Bert. It was my worst decision I took in my life to do that. What I experienced there has scarred my life, and remembering such memories makes every strand of hair on my body stand of creepiness. My name is Anya. I got a job as a nurse in a women's hospital, so I moved to a small little house away from the hospital. The neighborhood was quiet to begin with. My house had a yard and a tree adjacent to it, and a lovely backyard. It was my friend's house, actually, that he had lent to me to live in. When I had reached the area with my dog Bert, he was behaving in a weird way to start with. While sitting in car, he began barking and looking backwards. I checked, but there was nothing but trees there and other houses. The people were looking at my car and truck from their perspective outside, through windows, which I found weird. Bert, who still seemed agitated, I could not understand him, so I tied him up upstairs in my room and put food for him to eat. I thought he was just being disturbed, being in a new place and surrounded by new people. But little did I know that things were about to get much worse. The unpacking took all day, and it was dark outside, so I decided to order some food. After dinner, I cleaned up, put the garbage bags outside. I saw an old woman right across the street doing the same. I bowed to her. She came to me and told me to call her any time. She could not be outside this time of day, as it could be dangerous. I walked inside and found Bert whimpering. I kept him beside me for the night. Next morning, I opened the front door and found my newspaper was shredded, as if some animal did it. I picked it up and threw it in the dustbin. I left early morning. The road was quite empty and weather was foggy. I was driving on my road, when my eyes caught attention of something that ran past my car from behind one side to another. I thought it was a street dog, and its body looked a little longer than usual. I brushed it off. Bert was agitated all the time that I lived in this house. He would bark into the plains and would whimper in fear out of nowhere. I even took him to the vet, so they said it must just be the surrounding change. After a week, I took a day off and went for a tour in the city with Bert. He appeared happy and normal. We returned home, but he was refusing to go inside. I kept the front door open and let him sit outside until he would calm down. I went to the kitchen to get some water and snacks for him, and I heard him barking. I shouted his name and asked him to come inside. That is when I heard him screaming in pain, as if something was trying to kill him. I ran outside, bottle in my hand, but his cries became more severe. I was scared and muddled as to what was happening. I saw Bert lying on the front door. Blood was flooding from his legs. I looked around as to what was happening and who could have done this. I will never forget what I saw. It was some monster who was walking on all of his four legs. His body was long and legs were a little outward from his body. I had never seen such a thing. His face was like a dog, but not a usual one. His teeth were pointed and looked as if they were coming out of its jaw. The body was hairless, looked malnourished, and reminded me of a naked mole rat on steroids. Whatever it was, it jumped above the fence and ran behind our house towards the other section of houses. I was puzzled and petrified. His eyes were deep yellow, shining like bolts of lightning. I looked down at Bert, who was lying on the ground and wounded. He was crying in pain and his energy was decreasing. I took him to the vet, but they failed to save his life. The picture kept coming to my head as it caused me loss for a lifetime. I was very close with that dog. Sorry for my English. I'm 41, college educated with some professional experience. I have never in my life done any drugs or drink alcohol. I also like to listen to music from the late 60s and 70s, a time where music was very mentally stimulating. Anyhow, this all took place about 7 years ago, September 10th, 2003. It was a clear, warm night, and I was out in my yard, stargazing. I had a fantastic open view of the sky to the south and west, and all of a sudden, I saw what looked like a large bat or pterosaur flying overhead from south to north. It was huge. The wingspan alone had to be 6 or 7 feet at least. It was dark brown in color, but I saw it so quickly I can't say for sure. I've seen bats before, and this wasn't anything like one of them. It was shaped more like a pterosaur or a large bird, with the exception of the size. The wings appeared more bat-like to me, as they were moving up and down in a flapping motion. It was moving too fast to be a bird, as small as it looked in the sky. I thought perhaps it was an owl because it didn't make any sound coming or going. But what would an owl be doing at that time of night? And why would one have a wingspan that big? Besides, I've seen owls and this clearly was not one. It flew much too fast and deliberate for a bird of prey, taking less than half a second to cover the same distances as other birds do in 2 seconds or so. I'm not sure that what I saw was an aircraft or anything man-made, nor did I see anything else that night that could have been mistaken for it. I'm not one to believe in UFOs or anything like that, but I know what I saw, and I don't think there's any other logical explanation, really. The pterosaur looked kind of bat-like, even though it was far too large to be one. It was shaped like a pterosaur or bird, with the exception of size. I was not sure how to process what I had seen. It was such a shocking sight. How could such a massive creature fly with wings like that? I firmly believe that what I saw was some sort of creature that does not exist today. Or maybe it does. I'm pretty sure it was no aircraft, and it flew too fast to be properly identified. Not only is there nothing in the newspapers about this, but there's nothing about it on the internet that I could find immediately. If it was some kind of hoax, or I was seeing things, I feel like somebody would have come forward by now, either claiming responsibility or setting the record straight. Before spending time running this down, I tried to see just how crazy I felt about it and researched. Well, turns out, there are several others who have reported seeing a pterosaur as well. I haven't seen many other accounts of seeing what I did over in Ohio, but there are a few. I've seen pictures of pterosaurs, and now I'm certain that this is what I saw, flying overhead. It's been years now since it happened, and that image will never get out of my head. What did I see? Some kind of prehistoric creature that has long been extinct. Also, I noticed there are at least a handful of accounts from natives around Papua New Guinea. Could it be that this creature is still alive and only seen in certain parts of the world? I'm not sure, but definitely curious to find out more about what I saw. It's been hard for me to come to terms with it, and difficult to talk about, especially because I don't want to seem crazy. The idea that there could be such a creature flying around out there in the night seems so impossible. But I know what I saw, and there is no other explanation for it. I would love to hear what others think, or if they have had a similar experience. Please, share with me in the comments below. I'm a former Marine. I grew up in the country. I know how to handle myself and am not an idiot who gets easily scared. But this changed things for me. About a week ago, my girlfriend and I were driving home from her parents' house. We live about an hour away. This was right around 1:45 a.m. We were taking back roads because they're shorter, and I was driving. No offense to my girlfriend, but she prefers the long roads, the ones that take a long, long time. Sure, there's no backcountry roads, but hey, it's my preference. As we're coming around a curve, we saw something that ran across the road in front of us. My first instinct was that it was a deer, but when I looked again, there was no way it could have been a deer. It was too big, too black. And the second thing I thought was perhaps a bear, trying to rationalize what I knew in my head and what I was seeing in front of me. The road was kind of winding around, and there's no real good way to describe the shape other than saying it looked like a large, very tall dog or wolf. I couldn't see really many other features because it all happened so fast, but I'm confident it was not a deer or a bear. One thing that really bothered me, though, was the way it ran, because it was running on two legs. I know that's not normal for any wolf or dog or canine. I know that bears move on two legs, but I don't think they move that fast, nor do they have hocks in their legs like a dog does. I've seen plenty of both, and they all run on fours. Anyway, we both been pretty shook up by it, and my girlfriend had been crying the entire time we had got back home. We have been talking about it since then, and I really hate to entertain the idea of a werewolf, but I always wonder, what if? If it wasn't a werewolf, then what was it? Had this thing tried to attack us, we would have been screwed. It was easily the size of a giant wolf. I can't imagine anything being able to take on a fight like that. I'm telling you, I'm not confident enough in my training to say that I could have kept us alive. There's no telling what that thing is capable of, or what it could have done to us that night, had it decided to want to rip us out of the car. With the size of that thing, I'm pretty sure it could easily take down us. I'm also not the only one who's seen this thing. Check this out. My brother-in-law lives about 5 miles from us. I guess he's seen it too. He himself told me he was driving home from work at around 10 p.m. He also saw it running by the road in front of him. Said the descriptions was the same, and he went to investigate where it had come from. He said he saw this thing look up at him, and his heart was pounding in his chest. He thought he was going to die. Luckily for him, it just kept on going into the cornfield behind where he was at. He described it to me like this thing was on a mission to get somewhere, and he felt like its expression and the way it treated him was a mere annoyance, an inconvenience. Crazy when you think about all this, isn't it? He only told me this because I shared with him my experience. The one that happened, that I'm telling you now. I asked him if he knew what it could have been, and we both came to the same conclusion. We're pretty confident it was some dog-wolf thing. I'm not going to use the term werewolf because I don't believe that, but it was something paranormal. We've talked and thrown the idea around of calling animal control, but neither of us know what they're going to do, if anything at all. We wrestled with the idea of calling the game warden. Would they even do anything? Would they even be able to do anything? Probably not. I do wonder, though, if some things and some of us are just more attractive to things like this. Where I grew up, and the home I grew up, there was always a lot of strange things going on. My parents firmly believed the house was haunted. I had some pretty wild experiences in that house myself, but I never thought I'd experience something like this. I've been to a lot of places, and have never had anything come up missing from me or attacked. So, what do you think? Is there something out there? And if so, what is it? Is what I saw real, or is this a real, living, breathing werewolf? Are werewolves real? My girlfriend and I both stand as witnesses to what we saw that night. Anything would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for your time. I work as a cab driver in New Mexico City. One night, I was coming home after dropping off a passenger. The streets were empty as it was around 2 a.m. My last drop was somewhere that I have never been to. So, I followed the navigation, and there came a road with fewer streetlights. I was moving ahead with normal speed, but what happened next has kept me driving till date. I saw a human-like figure running from one side of the road and bumping into my vehicle. I thought I'd hit a human being walking, so I was unlocking my seatbelt to go and check it out, but I saw him standing up. It was not a human being. His height was around 8 feet, and his physique was slim in nature, rather distorted. He was naked, but it was definitely not a human being. Shiny silver body, but no hair on it. His posture was strange, and the way he was bent didn't make any sense. His spinal cord was also very visibly curved. He stood in front of my car and briefly looked behind him. He had no face. It scared me to death. I stopped breathing momentarily and could hear my heart beating out of my chest. The drooling mouth and such hideous creature features frightened me. He jumped to the other side of the road, making a loud squeal. It all happened so fast I could not digest what had just happened. I've never seen such a creature in my entire life, and did not know how to react. I began revving the engine and driving at the highest speed possible, without burning out. When I drove out of there and came to the next intersection, I tried to pull over and calm myself down. What I encountered looked more like a demon. I would like to start off and say that I'm a very rational, very level-headed individual. I don't typically believe in UFOs or Bigfoot or any other strange type of paranormal ghostly activity. I have never believed in any of it. I'm very much a science man, something you could see that's tangible, physical. I'm also extremely skeptical of what I saw, but I swear on my mother's grave, what I saw was not just my mind playing tricks on me. I've been out here hunting for many, many years and never saw anything like it. Even if I could somehow come up with a normal explanation for this, it still means something paranormal occurred to make sense of what I saw, and it certainly was nobody in a suit. The only reason I'm really writing this is because the realization there may actually be some truth behind these creatures, as we as humans have no idea what we're really dealing with. We may think we know, but we really have no idea. Back in 2005, I was deer hunting in central Missouri. I was walking through a large bean field when I saw what looked like a small black bear cub. As I approached and got closer, I realized it wasn't a bear cub. And also FYI, normally you would never approach a cub, but from what I saw, it didn't quite look like a bear cub the closer I got, so it was my curiosity that drew me closer. Instead of it being a bear cub, it was this very small, black humanoid creature. It had a disproportionately large head, and its eyes were jet black. It was standing clearly on its hind legs and holding a small black object in its right hand. The creature was silent and looked at me as I walked right by it. I was stunned by what I saw and couldn't believe what I was seeing. I regained composure and quickly picked up my pace and fled. It did not follow me, and I never saw it again. This thing was so strange looking. It's always stuck out in my mind. It was covered in very short, rough hair that looked, I'd guess, around 10 millimeters long. The hair on its head was not as thick as the rest of the body. I would guess it weighed no more than 40 pounds or so, but it's an estimate. Its eyes were also glistening black, and they seemed to be almost lidless. I wasn't sure if it was looking at me, its eyes, or its black object, but I got the feeling it was very aware of my presence. The face was very human-like, but it had a very pronounced brow ridge, and its nose was broader than a human's, kind of like Neanderthal-looking. Its mouth was very small and slit-like. The lips were black, as if they had been stained with ink. It was standing on its hind legs and was about 1 meter tall, give or take. The black object it held in its right hand, I don't know what it was. It was about the size of a cell phone, but it was extremely thin and had an odd shape with 3 bulges on one side. I cannot tell you what it was. It did not look like a piece of metal or technology. I don't know. I do not believe this creature to be a Bigfoot or any other kind of man-like animal that we know today. I'm convinced that this might be some sort of extraterrestrial or possibly an otherworldly creature. Believe this or not, I could care less. I'm simply writing this to share my experience and to see if anybody else out there has had any similar experiences like I have. As a big horror movie lover and a sucker for paranormal activity, I used to do a lot of stupid stuff back in the days of my prime, which I fondly look back on. Some incidents, I regret, but some make me laugh white, and don't fall into the above-mentioned categories, but are incidents that left me confused about life, a bit traumatized as well. One of the incidents is about the time I was 22, and had recently found out about the haunted building in a nearby city that everybody refused to live in. Naturally, that intrigued me, and I, along with my other daring plus stupid friends, decided to go there and live in that building for 2 weeks to test it out. It took about a month to plan, because the building system was not properly maintained as nobody wanted to be there. So, we had to clean and sanitize. We traveled to the city by train, and had a blast since traveling with friends is always fun. This haunted building was a bit far away from the rail station. It took roughly 30 minutes to reach there by car. When we reached there, the receptionist gave us the keys and, surprisingly, the only person that was there was the receptionist. No guard, no cleaners, no managers, nothing. The receptionist gave us the keys and warned us to be safe, as the floor we had rented rooms on was the most haunted. She even told us that nobody lives there. There's no staff because nobody wants to work here. Even the receptionist would leave after giving us the keys. Anyway, we then took the rusty elevator to the 10th floor. The highest floor was there, and looked for our apartments. The 6 of us had rented 2, 3 in one room. We came inside with our bags and began examining the apartments. Both apartments had 3 rooms and 1 bathroom. The rooms were bare with only a bed and a weak nightstand beside. The paint was peeling and a round mirror was attached to the opposite wall of the bed. All the rooms were the same, except 2 rooms that faced the back of the building had windows that overlooked a large graveyard. We played rock, paper, scissors, and the loser had to sleep in the room with the window. The bathrooms had 1 toilet, with a small shower cabin and a sink. It wasn't very large, but it's not like it was cramped. Unfortunately, I was lost and had to sleep in the room by the window. The first night was fairly uneventful, and I slept, although not very soundly since I usually had trouble sleeping at new places. We woke up the next day, and since we didn't have any groceries, we just heated up water, made instant noodles. The day was spent exploring the building from top to bottom, taking silly pictures at various places from memories. At night, when I was sleeping, I kept hearing weird, creepy noises. It sounded like a woman whispering, "Leave," over and over again. I woke up exhausted, my legs having scratch marks that I was sure were not there before. I ignored them and continued on with my day. However, the next night's incidents is what really scared me. I heard that creepy whispering that night too, but not only of a woman, but also a man, and a child's voice telling me to leave. The voices multiplied, and I suddenly woke up. How I wish I hadn't, because what I saw could not be easily erased from my memory. I saw a woman sitting atop one of the wings of the fan, with her hair in front of her face. A man also stood near the window, and he too also had long hair covering his face. A child stood at the end of my bed, face also covered with black hair. The sight horrified me, and I could not scream as my voice felt like it was stuck. A few moments later, I regained my senses, jumping up from the bed and running for the door, all the while screaming. Hearing my screams, the two friends that lived with me came out and, after looked at a panicked state, they asked me what was wrong. I told them what I saw, and we went to the other apartment to check on our friends. My other three friends were also awake, and apparently the other friend, Alex, who had gotten the other window room, had also experienced the same thing. We decided to leave as soon as possible after this incident. None of us wanted to sleep there. We packed our bags, called a cab to get us to the nearest hotel. The nearest was at least 20 minutes away, and that's where we spent the night. The next day, we discussed what had happened and decided it was too scary. We decided not to go back. However, my friend relayed a very interesting story to me. Before he had seen these apparitions, apparently he had seen a large black figure creeping in and out of his room, and also talked about seeing a demon flying thing outside his window. And that's not all. One of my other friends could have sworn she saw a gargoyle-like creature flying around the building late at night. This terrified me even more, and this ultimately sealed my decision not to come back. Deciding to never go back, we called the receptionist and told her to come to the hotel so we could give her the keys. She met us and told us how everybody who came to live there soon left and came to this exact hotel as this was the nearest. It felt stupid doing the same thing, but she told us this place was full of demonic activity, creatures of the night, and ghosts. People have seen all sorts of stuff in there, and, ironically, we had gotten so scared and ran away like the others. I don't know if I regret the decision to try and live there, but it left me with an image that scarred me for life. I should be grateful. I could have been pulled away into the depths of hell by strange dark creatures and ghosts. Anyway, it's taught me a lesson not to live and tamper with the paranormal, or anything that goes bump in the night. I saw what I believed to be a Bigfoot in 1994. At the time, I had just graduated college and had the summer off before starting my very first job. My brother, who lives in Montana, offered me a place to stay for the summer, since he was stationed in Fort Harrison right outside of Helena. It's not something I normally believed in, but that all changed after this incident on the side of the mountain. Anyway, I was up early one morning and decided to go for a hike on the nearby paths. My goal was to get to the top of the foothill, build my endurance and energy, get a good sweat working, and just enjoy the outdoors since I'd been so cooped up with my studies. I was about a half-mile away. The weather was hot, and it was July, so I didn't have to deal with any snow, like I would in winter. I would go and visit my brother in winter, and it was always too cold to do anything. I was making my way up this hillside during my hike, and I started thinking to myself how nice it would be if I were looking at the view from the peak. I decided to keep going, to get a little closer, to see if I could crest the top of the hill and scout any sceneries that might be worthy of taking pictures. So I'm almost there, and I get about 10 feet from the top of this portion of the hill that I'm on, when everything around me is quiet. I feel strange. I can vividly remember the sensation in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right, but I kept pressing onward, trying not to think about it. I remember right before it happened, I pulled my canteen off my backpack, took a big swig, and wiped my mouth. And right as I was wiping my mouth, I hear this crashing sound through the brush behind me. It sounded like it came from something really big. Like, imagine a moose sprinting through the brush. Now, in this moment, you have to understand something. I'm a city boy. I grew up in Chicago for many years and had never been around anything like this. My experience in the wilderness was nil. I turn around and see this giant, black, hairy creature standing probably no more than 10 feet away from me, facing me, looking at me. This thing was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall and wide, like a linebacker. It looked pissed, plain and simple. This thing looked like it was getting ready to rip me in half. The scowl on its face told me everything I needed to know. It was not happy to see me. I also noticed it had these claws in each hand and was holding them up towards me, like a very hostile stance. It had long, dark hair. Its face was similar to that of a gorilla, but far more human-like. I was terrified. The eyes were also black and soulless. It's like I was looking at some sort of mutation of a caveman. It didn't move. It stood perfectly still, staring at me, never moving. After a few seconds, the thing slowly took a step towards me, like one of those statue people that when you move towards them, they do move towards you. I was shaken, and I ran as fast as I could the opposite direction. I didn't stop until I got back down to the portion of trail I had originally come up. The entire time, I could hear this thing paralleling me in the woods, crashing through the underbrush, but staying hidden. I was traumatized by the entire experience. I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'8", and probably 180 pounds soaking wet. But if that thing wanted to kill me, there would not have been much I could do about it. I never told anybody until now. I didn't think anybody would believe me. After hearing all these other stories, I know I'm not crazy. That thing was real. When I eventually told my brother about the experience, I was so shaken up by what happened, I started crying, and he held me. I felt validated, and he explained that he has many friends that are hunters that have mentioned the same creature. They believe it's a Bigfoot. He also explained of its territorial, behavioral tendencies, and apparently, this is not the first written experience or verbal experience from people who live on this side of the mountain. And while he himself has never seen it, many others have. Even now, I don't know what to make of it, after all these years later, but I do know that what I saw is very, very real, and I'm just glad I made it out of there alive. I'm originally from Wales, where this happened. I'm now living in California. I work in the film business for a visual effects company that has done some of James Cameron's stuff. Also, I play bass guitar for several local bands here in LA. Just a little bit of background on me. I'm also a very honest, very credible person. I have nothing to lose. I have a good career and would appreciate this encounter not being tied to my actual name. I don't want to get laughed at by any peers. Okay, here's what's happened. I was out running on the beach in Swansea, Wales. This was back in 1999. It was about 7 a.m. There was nobody around. The sun had just begun to rise, and I could tell from the weather it was going to be a beautiful day. I was running south along the beach and came to a more secluded spot. And there was what I can only describe as a mermaid-like creature sitting there on the rocks. It or she was about 10 meters into the sea and looked hideous. Let me explain that when I use the term mermaid, I'm not depicting your stereotypical fantasy beautiful mermaid. I'm explaining that this creature was a hideous, amphibious, sea-looking creature. It was vile. Scales and long, scaly tail. Its skin appeared green and slimy. It had these ugly, bulging eyes, and it was staring at me. I stopped in my tracks, trying to process that what I was seeing was real and right in front of me. I thought it was a person in a costume at first until a couple seconds passed and it turned to look at me, staring at me. And during those few seconds, before it slid back into the sea and disappeared, it looked more fish-like. It all happened so fast. I was actually running on the beach, so I had to stop and catch my breath before I could jog again. Not to mention trying to process the actual shock of seeing whatever this was. Honestly, I think I caught it by surprise. Because of where I was on the beach, I kind of came up on it, and I don't think it expected anybody to be there. The expression it gave me was kind of more shocking, which is why it dove into the sea and disappeared. I guess I only use the term mermaid because I don't know how else to describe it, but it was very humanoid looking, like if you were to combine a fish and a man. It did not have long, stringy, beautiful hair or seashells covering its breast, like you would expect in typical mermaid fashion. This was a hideous, fish-looking creature. But the lower half, just like a mermaid, appeared to be that of a long body and a fishtail at the end. Anyway, I understand this is a very strange story, and I myself am still not sure what to make of it, even all these years later. I've actually quite forgotten about this, really, until recently. I did not run home and tell everybody about this. In fact, nobody knew about it until about a week ago. I remembered it and told my girlfriend over dinner one night. She thought it would be a good story to share with you guys, so here I am. It wasn't a dream either. I've never seen anything like this before or since, and I'm glad I get to tell the story here now. I hope you believe me because it really did happen. I grew up in the Bangor area and have been hiking since, well, before I could walk, it seems. I'm very experienced and can identify most animals. This report contains many facts of scientific value, some useful for explaining possible causes, or others simply interesting. I've omitted specific details to focus on the events themselves. In the early morning of September 1st, 2009, I was hiking on the Cutler Ridge Trail in a state park, known as Mount Katahdin State Park. It had been a wet night, and there were still patches of snow and ice right near the summit. I was descending the trail when I saw something moving up ahead of me, roughly 30 yards. I stopped and watched as a large, dark, man-like figure emerged right from the undergrowth and began walking up the trail towards me. The figure was completely crimson-clad, from head to toe, its face hidden by a dark hood or cloak. It was large and muscular, and was walking with a deliberate stride. As it drew closer, I could see its skin was as black as coal. I was terrified, and I could sense something wrong about this person or thing. There was no fear, only cold calculation. It walked past me on the trail nonchalantly, never making eye contact, and continued up the mountain, like it didn't exist. The evil that emanated from this thing was terrifying. I was so shaken up by this experience, I nearly collapsed when I reached the parking lot. I did report what I saw to the ranger station, but they laughed in my face, told me I'd probably just seen a black bear, and that I'd been smoking too much Pacific Northwest reefer. They refused to investigate any further, and thought I was pranking them. But I'm here to tell you that what I saw was no black bear. This was something that was pure evil, sent to follow me in the wilderness. I believe it was the same entity that was glimpsed in Bangor a few weeks earlier. I know people will find this hard to believe, but I am 100% certain that what I saw that day, the events have haunted me ever since, and I hope by sharing my story, I can maybe help others aware of this dark danger lurking in our forests. I'm convinced that what I saw was a demon or something. I mean, we're not alone out there. We just don't know it yet.